All right, next we have a discussion on the takeaways at the intersection of golf and travel featuring Karin Mast, the Senior Vice President of Miles Partnership, and Michael Dominguez, President and CEO for Associated Luxury Hotels International. Well, maybe it's just you. Are you going to go first?
Michael's coming up as
Okay.
well, yes. I'm not alone. Thank you so much for the introduction. As stated, my name is Karin. I go by a variety of names. If you are one of my captors at home, you call me Mom. If you're on the golf course with me, you might say Ms. 30 Handicap. That tends to lead Alan, our travel writer from last night, to say I might be an MFer, right, with that kind of handicap. My husband calls me the War Department, and anyone that I've hired since 2020 calls me Karin because they refuse to work for a Karen, okay? We've seen what damage has been done on social media. So I'm here today to talk to you about the intersection of golf and travel. As Susie stated, I'm the Senior Vice President at Miles Partnership. We are the largest destination marketing firm in the United States. We represent our clients as large as Brand USA, who is tasked with bringing travelers from overseas to the domestic mainland, including Hawaii, I should say that. Our clients start as large as that and range in anything from state tourism offices like Visit Florida, Visit California, regional entities such as Branson and Myrtle Beach, all the way down to our resort operators such as PGA National in Palm Beaches, the Kahala Resort in Honolulu, et cetera. So let's dive into a little bit about those trends. Things that you might want to take home as points of interest as you're thinking about your plans in both marketing and operations for 2023 and beyond. First up, international travel. I know that some of you might think there's been an awful lot of statistics today, and that is true, so I'll try not to bore you to tears. I do have some fun ones in here that will require your attention, including changes in demographics among the US population, travelers, and golfers in general. And of course, sustainable options that are sought by travelers and the definition of such. So first up, international travel on the rise. Hooray, right? Why does that matter? Well, it's because in 2019, more than $200 billion was spent in the United States by travelers that have come from abroad. That is about $500 million a day that they're contributing to our economy. We don't yet see that happening, but the good news is global travel in general has returned to pre-COVID levels. So global travel, we would categorize that as any sort of domestic or international travel. So across the globe, this data came out this morning actually. We're seeing the health index return to just over 100, which is nice. For the first time since January of 2023 it started, and we're continuing to climb even in spite of the economic conditions. This is limited to certain areas. However, if you are at war with Russia, you probably aren't traveling as much as you would like to. So we've got some areas that are a little bit of a decline in comparison to the same time in 2019. The US is holding its own, specifically with domestic travel. We're over-indexing in comparison to June 2019. All good numbers. A lot of this was shared this morning by Christina, so it shouldn't be a surprise to you. What you might be interested in seeing is how international travel versus domestic is changing around the world. The Middle East is actually the only area across the globe that has returned to 2019 levels and surpassed them thus far. And compared to 2022, they're up 49%. APAC is still on the decline in comparison to 2019. Because of the travel conditions in that area, they haven't quite returned. Africa, the Americas, and Europe are still lagging off of 2019 in terms of international tourist arrivals to their destination, but they are making headway. In May of international travel here in the United States, this is inbound arrivals, is returning to 2019, primarily led by the Canadians. So thank you to our neighbors in the north. I know we've got our Club Caddy guys in the back from Toronto. Thank you for being here and contributing to our economic conditions. Mexico's doing well, but the rest of the globe isn't yet coming back to the United States, primarily from the Asia market. In May of 2023, $85 billion to date had been spent by those travelers coming to the United States. We're well on our way. This is a great number. We'd like to see this and the fact that it continues to improve, but we aren't yet returning back up to that $200 billion level that we'd like to see by the end of 2023. In fact, it's predicted that this level won't actually be reached again until 2025, specifically from international travel. So this is our U.S. travel forecast. It comes from the U.S. Travel Association. It is updated monthly, and what they're showing right now is that in terms of international arrivals, in the late 2024, 2025, we'll actually reach the same number of arrivals we had pre-pandemic. So they'll be in 2019 arrivals. This is good news for arrivals and people coming in and taking trips to the United States, but spending will be just slightly behind that. The U.S. Travel Association is predicting that spending won't fully recover for international travelers until 2025 in its entirety. So we're looking at $181 billion spent in 2019. The forecast is by the end of 2025, early 2026, that we'll have that same amount of spending in the United States. Again, that's about $500 million per day by international travelers. So some good news, right? Please don't get sad yet, because the domestic looks pretty good. So for international travelers, where are these folks coming from? I talked a little bit about our neighbors to the north. Thank you, Canada. But it isn't just the Canadian market that has recovered. We've got some others that we're watching very closely in terms of emerging markets, albeit tiny. These are the ones you should be paying most attention to. It's the travelers from Canada, the UK, Germany, Netherlands, and Ireland. All of those markets are expected to predict at their 2019, to return at their 2019 levels by 2025. I highlighted Mexico, India, and Colombia for you as well, because those are all markets that will be returning to their original levels. But for this audience in particular, they're not exactly great golf markets. The number of people in India and Colombia that play golf are limited as a percent-wise in comparison to some of our European markets. You might be interested to know that Iceland actually has the highest percentage of golfers as a percent of its population. 1 in 20 people in Iceland play golf, which, might be pretty easy if you have a population of about 200,000, right? Don't have to pull that many people together to form your own tournament and hit the courses. But for Germany returning, Netherlands and Ireland, they have some of the highest percentage of golf players in the European region. So for those travelers that are coming in, you certainly want to take note of them. All right. What else do you need to know? The Canadians, right? I'm going to keep going back to the Canadians. This information is from Deloitte and their consumer traveler survey that they do every single month. There have been concerns about the recession and the economic conditions around the globe and what's happening. But interestingly enough, the Canadians are as optimistic as our high-income US travelers. They believe that they want to continue spending more on visiting destinations further from home. And they aren't going to pull back their spending on what time of year they go or what types of places they stay. So in a little while, when Michael talks about the high-income travelers here domestically, remember that the Canadians are tracking at the same level. 54% said they plan to spend more on traveling to exactly where they want to be. They don't want to stay farther away from their destination, which means our golf resorts are going to be front and center in terms of what people want to have from an experience standpoint and indulging on rounds of golf. All this to say, as the world turns, just like a soap opera, things happen, but travel is here to stay. This is not a trend any longer. Travel isn't something that is going anywhere. And despite things like the bird flu and Zika, I'm sure people remember swine flu in the middle of all of it, travel continues to rise and will forever be a part of our economy. With the up-and-coming middle class coming out of our population centers in Colombia, India, China, we're predicting 240 million international travelers and trips worldwide going into 2025, and that will continue to spike as more and more people have their doors and their hearts and minds open to travel. So, what is next? Golf. Greg shared some great stats this morning about the fact that we've made gains within the U.S. golf tourism market. So very specifically, 26 million trips of 50 miles or more were made in 2022 specifically by people in the United States looking to travel to play golf. Their average spend was $1,184, right? So if I'm going to get in my car, I probably filled up my giant Yukon SUV, which I happen to drive, excuse me. Live in Colorado, I have a few kids. I'm called the War Department. I've got to drive a Yukon. Just the gas alone cost me $1,184 to drive down to play at a different course in Springs. But that's okay. It helped the economy by driving $25.5 billion in spend specifically to golf resorts by people who are on overnight trips. So pat yourself on the back. The overall golf tourism market has grown almost threefold since in the last 20 years, right? We're at $31 billion in spending in 2022 just by those domestically engaged in golf tourism. But with that, we have to keep a few things in mind. Again, this is for your marketing and your operational folks. You have to keep in mind that the demographics during this time are changing drastically, not just for the golfers, but for the US population overall. Right, so let's break down just a few of these. This one is specific to your ethnic profiles. And I don't know if you've seen this data presented by generation, but I find it quite intriguing because if we think about our boomers, who were 72% white, the makeup of our nation is changing now to those that are post-Gen Z, only identifying as 48% white. We see a giant increase in the number of Hispanics, as well as those that are two or more races. And this has a lot to do with then how we treat our future generations of travelers and our future generations of golfers, because we want to make sure that we are showing them ads and promotions where they feel represented. 78% of Expedia survey respondents said they've actually made a choice based on the inclusivity of those ads and whether or not they felt they would be represented and welcomed at those businesses. And this isn't just related to the changing demographic of race. Age is also an important factor to take into consideration, as the number of people that are 65 and older is expected to double by 2050. Interestingly enough, AARP did a giant study to understand whether or not people over 50 years old felt represented in the images. And with the help of Ad Age and Ad Weekly, they found that only 15% of online images and ads within social media featured people over 50 years old. Although this segment right now represents 46% of the US population and is continuing to grow. So please keep this in mind as you're looking at your own audiences and those audiences that you would like for the future. The boomers represent a brilliant economy for us to continue to reach out to share these experiences with. Retirement, as people approach retirement, golf is more likely to increase in terms of their interests and opportunities. So please, please keep this into consideration and don't just represent people under 50 in your ads. As we learned this morning, 25% of our on-course players are female and 22% are now Black, Asian, or Hispanic. So we're starting to see ads from Michelob Ultra and others. I found a very fun one here from Bad Birdie, who is doing sort of more fashionable, if you will, golf shirts and so forth. This is probably one of the more tame ads, but please take a look and see what you can to move from the traditional sort of findings that were shared by the National Golf Foundation in terms of people's perception of golf being boring into one that is more fun, that is more welcoming of female, Black, Asian, and Hispanic travelers. Okay, sustainable options. This one's a tough one for me because for anybody who says, what is sustainability across the room, you probably have 6,000 different definitions. Anyone want to take a guess? What is sustainability? It's like not driving a Yukon, right? A Prius, maybe? Okay. One of the challenges that Expedia faced when it did its survey of sustainable travelers was that it said 90% of travelers said they were looking for sustainable options. 90%. And then they said, well, what is a sustainable option, right? And they actually had to survey those same people to say, what do you mean by sustainable? So of the travelers that Expedia surveyed, they said to them, sustainability means lessening environmental impacts, supporting local economies, local cultures and communities, and visiting lesser known destinations. This is what it means to them. 50% of those consumers said they'd be willing to pay more for transportation, activities, and lodging if the option was more sustainable. How much more? Are they actually going to put their money where their mouth is? Maybe up to 38% more. I think the challenge is that the word is not getting out, that what you were doing as a business to conserve water, to consider your waste management principles, to operate your resorts with perhaps LEED certification, it's not being well shared or well understood by our travelers. And it isn't just those travelers, it's actually meeting planners as well. According to American Express's Global Meeting Planner Survey, 80% of meeting planners said that their organization takes sustainability into account when they're planning their meetings. So when they're looking at golf tournaments, at filling the function space in your resorts, they're looking at sustainability. Of those 80%, 76% actually have defined sustainable meetings programs that they have to adhere to. And they want information from your resorts and from your courses on what you're doing to meet these standards. In fact, outside of paper usage, energy saving, and booking green suppliers, they're even asking people like Marriott to give them their sustainability credentials. This is a self-reported fact from Marriott that said 1 in 7 corporate customers asked Marriott to provide all of the credentials they had on their sustainable practices. And if you think about the amount of business Marriott does in general, because they were able to provide this information, they captured $5.5 billion in business that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. That's a huge impact, and I would expect that within the next 3 to 5 years, it won't be 1 in 7. It'll likely be 3 in 7. So what does this mean? You need to start promoting the fact that you have low environmental impact within your resort or within your golf courses, that you're supporting your local community. Look at all of the dollars you're giving back to the community in terms of charitable tournaments that are hosted on site, what you're doing to support the local economy by having what is essentially the hidden gem of restaurants within your courses or within your resorts. When I think about the golf business overall, I would say that you're already doing every single one of these things, but perhaps not telling the story in such a way that will connect with people who are seeking out these sustainable options. Expedia recommends that you work directly with your local tourism office to ensure that when people are looking for this information, that your local tourism office has it. It's available on your profile pages, within the bios about your resorts and about your courses, that you're putting it on your own websites, you're sharing it with third-party booking companies. TripAdvisor has its own green certification program. Anywhere you can promote the efforts you've made to reduce your water consumption or help with waste management needs to be out of the operation and into the hands of your marketers. It's incredibly important in terms of what people are looking for travel in the future. Okay, all that to say, my name is Karin. Michael is my colleague. He'll be joining us from ALHI next and presenting his slides. If you have any questions, I'm happy to do them after Michael's presentation when we get together. So. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Well done.
Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Dominguez. I am the president and CEO of Associated Luxury Hotels. We represent the independent space in the hotel world. So, some of our clients that you would know would be the Broadmoors, the Don Cesar, those type of properties that are independent owners as a whole. We also have some of the largest brands, and prior to joining ALHI, I was the Chief Sales Officer at MGM Resorts, and MGM Resorts is still our largest member as far as within the ALHI family. As I told their president and CEO that I'm no longer the brother, I'm the cousin. So I get invited to some family functions, not all of them anymore, and that's kind of how that all fits in. But it gives us a broad perspective of the travel, meetings, and events industry, specifically domestic. And what Karin and I talked about was she was going to focus international. I was really going to dig domestically and tell you what we're seeing and tell you some of the trends that kind of line up. And from the hotel perspective, one of the things to take away is that we're back to 2019 overall, and we have surpassed that. as an industry. The one thing I keep stressing with everybody, the word of the year is bifurcated. And I don't care if you're talking about the economy or if you're going to talk about this recovery that I'm going to point out. It is not universal, but we tend to talk in generalizations versus understanding kind of what's building the number. So I'm going to talk a little bit to that. What has really changed right now, and I think this is good for the golf courses specifically, we're seeing an uptick in the midweek business. The weekends were taking care of themselves. It's the midweek that has started to come roaring back. So what does that mean? Business travel is back, and that means group is back. It's the only thing that drives the midweek audience for us in the hotel industry generally. So that's good news for everybody, specifically on the business travel side. And most importantly, group is almost back to norm of 2019. And I would take this with a caveat. This is overall demand. If it wasn't for Omicron in 2021 or 2022 in January, February, and March, we'd already be back. The numbers are a little bit off, but the number of groups we're seeing is now fully back. We actually have an issue in our industry. We have a compression issue. I didn't put this into the slides, but we haven't built anything to speak of that's not limited service in the hotel side. We're not building big boxes. We're not building meeting space. We're not building a lot of big resorts. So there's nothing to relieve this compression from the meetings and events industry. And it's more than we've ever seen, and I'll explain that. Part of what's driving that is we took 3 years worth of meetings and we shoved them into 2 years. So you have that, and then you have people waking up saying, oh, the world is moving, and we started to now try to plan meetings, and all that space is taken. That's a challenge, and that's a challenge across the board. Resorts specifically came roaring back, and you'll see that, but this is the bifurcation I'm talking about. The top 25 markets in the United States are mainly metro urban areas, and what you'll see, there's only 3 that have actually recovered, fully recovered in real RevPAR, if you factor inflation, back to 2019. Everybody else is still struggling. These are main metro areas. Why would that be? Well, they need international travel. They also need business travel, and they need those large citywides that didn't come roaring back yet. So that's why they're a little bit off. But why I think this is so different, every single recovery in our industry in history has been driven by the 25 markets being compressed and pushing compression everywhere else. Right now, it's a reverse compression. It's everyone else that is full that is now starting to compress the cities. When we talk to meeting professionals and they're like, I can't get into Miami, we're like, have you tried Chicago? Because they got plenty of space. And have you tried San Francisco? Because they have plenty of space. And those are the options right now. Those are a little bit of the challenges that we're seeing. That's what I mean by bifurcation. Urban continues to grow the fastest because they have the furthest to grow. So I always say sometimes it's a little bit skewed when you see the headlines. Why is it growing faster? Because it had the most room to make up. But resort is slowing down. So when you look at this chart, you can see that very top line. That is the resort sector. When you read 116% of RevPAR to 2019, the easiest way to think about that, it means we're 16% higher than 2019. That's the easy way to read it. 100%, we just got back to 100% in the urban areas, but we haven't exceeded it while everywhere else has. So that means it's actually still lagging. RevPAR in the suburban and town locations are slowing, but they're all above 2019 levels, and that's gonna be the one key that's consistent. Everything is above 2019. RevPAR growth in the interstate locations declined in April, but airport hotels increased. So why would airport hotels increase? Because business travel's back. And if business travel's back, airports get really, really busy very quickly, especially the airport hotels. And anyone who's traveled, you know, you might have a cancellation here or there, so you might be staying overnight at a hotel. So that is why we're seeing that kind of compression there. And then this is the interesting part. This breaks it out by tiers. So if you look at the bottom of this chart, you'll see luxury, upper upscale, upper mid-scale, and then mid-scale and economy. I think this is an important one because even if you look at the economy, and I'm going to talk much more to this, again, bifurcation. Take luxury and take economy and mid-scale, 2 different conversations. And it's the same reason if you watch the markets why TJ Maxx will suffer while Louis Vuitton is breaking records. We have 2 different audiences and we have to understand it. And for everyone in this room, the positive is the upper upscale and luxury is where everybody is still spending, everyone still has purchasing power. We don't see anything slowing down in that segment. We do see economy slowing down, and I'll explain why. But that really has to do with the excess savings that has been burned through in the lower 2 quintiles of income earners. The upper 3 quintiles of income earners still have $500 billion in excess savings sitting in their savings accounts. So that is why the spending is continuing. I actually think personally that's one of the reasons inflation is staying hot, because you have so much money that is, it's like playing with, it's a Vegas terminology, it's like playing with house money. It wasn't my money to begin with, and I can kind of spend it because I have it sitting in the bank. We gave away $2.5 trillion in stimulus funds. We had $2.5 trillion at its peak of excess savings, which means everything we gave went right into accounts. And I have one slide that will show you it popped with every stimulus bill. That's not a political statement, that's an economic statement where the money went. And if you think about it, we gave away $2.5 trillion when we couldn't go anywhere and we couldn't travel anywhere and we couldn't spend on anything. So it all went into bank account, and most people kept their jobs, which means they didn't lose any income, and we gave them all this extra money. It's still sitting there and working its way through the cycle. It's actually good news long term. And this is what I was talking about. There is no supply growth. The reason that's important, and it's the reason I'm very excited about our industry, and it's going to continue to excel on the hotel side, usually we have this influx. You see that large uptick in 2016, 2018. Before we got there, we usually have, if you go back to 6 and 7, we have this large spike of inventory. Then we hit a down cycle because everybody that's in investment, they start investing while we're hot, and then the market slows down. And then we open in a slowed down market, and you know what brings down rates? All this extra inventory that we have to consume in a down market. We don't have the excess inventory right now, even if we slow down, which is telling us that's why rates are staying up and that's why demand is staying up across the board. Our industry is really, really healthy. What's not healthy is going to be mortgage debt that's coming due in 2023, 24, 25, 26. That is probably our biggest concern. There's about $80 billion in commercial mortgage loans that are going to be coming due during that time frame. Those are maturities of 5 to 7 years that actually were refinanced in 17, 18, and 19. Well, that's being refinanced in a very different rate environment than where we're going to be now. And that's why you're reading stories, for instance, when 2 hotels in San Francisco just gave the keys back to a bank because they're like, we can't afford the refinancing. And they're going to let the bank deal with it. Now, it's not a bad thing. There's a lot of cash on the sidelines waiting for distressed assets. They're not just distressed enough yet. They're waiting for them to be a little more distressed and it'll be a little more pain. But I do think it's going to get consumed and consumed pretty quickly. That's the only headwind I see in our industry, but that's an ownership headwind. It's not a demand headwind from the hotels specifically. This is really important. When you look at this, American Express Centurion lounges, we're at 123% improvement, so it's 23% up to 2019. Why does that matter? Again, business travel, high-end luxury travel. That's who uses the Centurion lounges. So that is telling us that luxury and business is still coming and still coming at a very rapid pace. I'm really optimistic for a variety of reasons, and this is one of them. Wages continue to outpace RevPAR and airfare gains. So even though airfare has increased, and even though RevPAR has increased and rates have increased, our wages have increased at a faster pace overall. And that's an overall population. And if you look at TSA throughput, we're actually at 102% of our traffic that we saw domestically to 2019. So we're actually up to that. And anyone who's traveled, we know we have issues. We don't have enough airplanes. And by the way, it's not a staffing issue anymore. If you want to know what's going on with the airline industry, we have an FAA issue. We don't have enough air traffic controllers. The reason the major airlines just cut a bunch of flights in New York for the summer was because we don't have enough air traffic controllers, specifically at LaGuardia. They're not fully trained, and you do not want a partially trained air traffic controller. So we cannot fly them. That is one of the reasons they pulled everybody back. But I think sometimes there's a lot of narratives that get out there. It's not about the personnel. It's not anybody trying to save money. You have 2 issues. We don't have enough air traffic controllers. We don't have enough airplanes because Boeing is well backed up. They can't deliver these planes for another 18 months. That's why we're not going to get any relief in that area. We're going to continue to be packed. That's good news. It's good news for the airlines, and as much as we may hate it, a healthy airline industry is necessary for all of us in this room. It is something that we absolutely need. First time in 17 months that business confidence has held steady, and most importantly, that right side of the chart, business investment is growing. We find a lot of positivity with business investment. Probably the one KPI we don't pay enough attention to, there's actually 2. If you're watching anything, there's 2. On the group side, watch business investment. As capital investment improves, that means they're investing in their companies. When they're investing in their companies, they're investing in meetings and events and travel. It just happens. It doesn't get cut. So that's a good thing. The other index, and this is just from a personal perspective, the Case-Shiller Home Index If you have not followed that, during my time in Vegas, it was the one metric we paid attention to because most people's wealth is tied to their home. And when that index was down, spending was down. When the index was up, spending was up. It was the one index we paid attention to, yet we don't talk a lot about it. It's basically a housing. What's your house worth? When your house is worth a lot, you have a lot of equity in it, you start to feel very bold. And when your house goes down, you see that equity disappearing, you don't feel as confident as you did before. It's very much psychology, but it's one of the indexes I would highly recommend, specifically for personal travel and personal spend. And then search travel for larger brands have fully recovered. So what does that mean? We've normalized. That's all I take away from the chart. We've now normalized back to 2019. We can stop talking about the pandemic. We can stop talking about 2019, and we can now start talking about I'm thrilled that we are past that January, February, and March area because I'm now doing comparisons of 2022, no longer 2019, because that Omicron period was that first part of the year. Now we've kind of normalized across the board. Economics, the one thing I would mention, and this is what I was talking about, if you've been watching CNBC this week, earnings are surprising everybody. And I'm really getting irritated that we tend to continue to be surprised. This recession, this narrative, we just don't see it. There's a great quote from Scott Kirby, the CEO of United Airlines. He actually made the comment very simply, if I wasn't watching CNBC, recession would not be in my vocabulary. And what he means by that, we can't see a single indicator looking forward that tells us we're in for a major downturn. The rate of growth is slowing, but the key word is growth. We're still growing. We're now growing at more normal rates. This telling us that corporations are still very healthy, even though you're talking about inflationary pressure. This is why everybody thought earnings were going to come down because of inflation. Well, you know what else is increased? Pricing. They're increasing the pricing to offset this, and earnings are kind of stable right now. That's a real positive for us. On the meetings and events side, I think this is a unique period. This is the first time in history that I believe that meetings and events and travel, specifically business travel, is not discretionary for businesses. Any other time we've had a downturn, it's discretionary because you've been having a lot of it. The fact that they haven't been together for 2 years is making it necessary for them to come together, regardless of the economics behind it. And that's different. Every company is talking about the same thing, cultural adhesion. How do I build culture? Everybody's been working from home for so long. I need to bring people together. There's no other way to do it than bringing people together face to face, and we're starting to see that in the numbers. The one thing that I think we are not considering when we're looking at labor and we're also looking at this compression, when you look at this chart, in 2019, it's kind of the baseline, but by the way, 2019 was a record year. We opened up 3.5 million new businesses in the United States in 2019, and that was an all-time record. Look at 2020, 21, and 22. We opened 15 million businesses, new businesses. During that bad down cycle, we opened up 5 million new businesses that shouldn't be there, and we wonder why there's a gap of 10 million jobs and not enough people to replace it. Because we keep thinking about 2019, not the fact that I have 15 million new businesses that now need employees that weren't there in 2019. That's part of this, and what we're finding on the meetings and events side, that's our biggest growth area. I think it's a separation. For every large company you hear pulling back travel or pulling back meetings, you'll hear the growth is in the mid to small companies. That's where the growth is. The growth is in startups. You know, I love startups because their whole purpose is to lose money when they start up. They literally don't care about their bottom line. They care about growing the business. They care about growing the value. So that's a little bit of a different, and we're seeing that. These are all tend to be startups. And that is really driving us right now in the meetings and event side. It's in the business travel. If you separate business travel, large companies are down in business travel, mid to small up in double digits. That's that bifurcation I was talking about earlier, but we tend to talk about business travel is down. Well, which segment are you talking about? Because not all business travel is down, and that's an important one across the board. I get a little disturbed with the narratives because the narratives kind of set the wrong tone because, you know, you hear about tech, you heard about all the tech layoffs. We think that's what's driving a recession is coming around the corner. No, tech had all-time high employees and all-time low productivity. They're trying to level set that. But it had nothing to do with finances. Because if you follow the market, tech's on fire. Tech's what's growing the market. That's not the issue. It's not a financial issue. It's a productivity issue. And the headlines are kind of disturbing because, to me, they misrepresent the issue. We all saw the headline where Microsoft is laying off 10,000 people. What is missing in the headline is they had hired 90,000 the 8 months before. So an appropriate headline was, we're going to hire 80,000 instead of 90. We changed our minds. That really is what is happening there. And there's not a single tech company outside of Twitter, but that's unique. Outside of Twitter, there's not a single tech company that has less employees than they did in 2019. They've all grown since then. They're right-sizing for the pandemic. They grew at a rate that wasn't sustainable during the pandemic, and then we've normalized. And all of a sudden, things have gone back to normal. Remember, we were never going to go back to movies. We were never going to go back to a mall. Everything was going to be online. And by the way, when this is all said and done, digital spending is up less than 4%. And it's still a physical buy when it's all said and done. Ever go to a mall on a weekend? You can't find a parking space. You know, that's where we've now normalized, and these companies weren't quite prepared for it. We were expecting an environment to kind of last forever. Consumer behavior, these are the things that everybody in here should be excited about. Luxury is for everybody. It's about the name, it's about reputation, it's about us wanting to say, yeah, I did spend $1,000 for that golf round, and it was literally a bucket list item. You know, that is the conversation we're seeing across the board. And this is from the Financial Times. But you can see luxury cars, top spend, personal luxury goods, second, luxury hospitality, the third largest spend. But the whole purpose or the whole point of this is luxury's on fire. I started this by saying you have to separate luxury from the mid-scale or literally economy spend. Economy in the hotel industry is the only segment that will shrink this year. Every other segment is growing. And that is kind of the differential. I will tell you, I don't know if this is happening in the golf world, it's happening in the hotel world. Everybody is now buying down to their appropriate category. So what do I mean by that? With all that extra cash that was sitting on the sidelines, people that used to buy, upper upscale were buying into luxury. And people that used to buy upscale were buying into upper upscale. And what we've seen over the last 6 months, everybody's starting to buy back into their normal tier. To say, I'm not spending the extra $400 to buy luxury, I'm going to stay in the upper upscale when it's all done. It's not a bad thing. It'll help us forecast when it's all said and done. This slide will show you that extra savings I was talking about. See the blue line? That is the excess savings during the pandemic versus every other recessionary period we've ever had. That's the extra money that's having to get flushed out of the system. And again, latest estimate right now is still $500 billion that is sitting in bank accounts that wasn't there before the pandemic. It was money that was given to them and put in bank accounts over a long period of time. That means we still have a lot of health, and I think it's one of the reasons I personally believe, and I would put some money on it, that we're going to have either a soft landing or very nominal growth, not a recessionary period. And part of it is because of this. If we were really heading into a recession, you know what the government would do right now? They'd pass a stimulus bill. You know what's sitting in these bank accounts? The stimulus bill. It's already in there. And that's one of the reasons we've been kind of going through this. I had this conversation today. I think we've had a bunch of micro recessions already. And it's the reason we're not feeling a recession. What do I mean by that? When tech was going down, housing was on fire. Tech comes roaring back, housing goes down. We have a banking crisis, housing is now picking up. Nothing's happening at the same time. They're all in little small pockets of verticals that's actually not making us feel the full pain. And as long as that continues, we have a shot. I'm not saying we will, but we have a shot of avoiding all of this. The liquidity I was talking about, this is a great visual to it. You see to the left, this is pre-pandemic, and then you see to the right was in Q4 of 2022. What I wanted to point out, the largest growth was in the lowest 2 quintiles. That's where the extra money went, and that's what's gotten spent. That has already been pulled out of the cycle. The other ones, they're kind of exactly where they've always been, which means your 3 higher quintiles, your 60% of highest earners, still have a lot of money sitting in the bank, which means you shouldn't feel it on a luxury side. And the beauty is, it's services, not goods, that everybody's still spending on. Goods have flattened, services are in. We're going to spend it on experiences across the board. My funnest thing, and this ties into the demographic piece that Karin talked about, this is really cool. But I always say the success of my career, specifically in sales and marketing, is real simple: follow the money. And if I had a second, I'd put the Jerry Maguire scene up there. You know, show me the money. This is what makes it all go. Now, why am I saying that? She talked about demographics. I'm not going to get into the ethnic demographics, which she did, because that is really good information. I wanted to talk about this. It's the boomers. We have $22 trillion sitting in 401k plans where if you're 72, yes, soon to be 74, if you're 72, you're having to take the money out. You have no choice. The government is forcing you to take the money out. The boomers were the birth of the 401k plan. Guess what the boomers have? Everything they've ever wanted. So when they have this extra money, guess what we're seeing it spent on? Luxury experiences, luxury services. And the interesting part is the boomers are the longest living, wealthiest generation in history, and we have all ignored them for a decade from a marketing perspective. It has all been about the millennials and the hotel business. It was, we're building hotels for the millennials, experiences for the millennials. You know what the millennials don't have? They don't have any money. That's great, but they're not spending. Affluent wealth right now will dominate. 220% increase that is expected in the affluent spend. And again, I'm a data person. The blue is the boomer. The black is the Xer. I'm the forgotten generation. I'm an Xer. But 95% of the wealth in this country is tied to two demographics, and we're spending so much time paying attention to the millennials and Generation Z. And then I have people say, well, the millennials are going to inherit all that, or Generation Z is going to inherit all that. No, they're not. The 100 wealthiest people in the world have dedicated to give all of their money to charity. We've never dealt with this kind of wealth, and that's the differential. It's not necessarily just going to get passed down. And if you don't believe me, this is how it's broken out by age group. And I get it's a balance. How do you capture everything you possibly can with the generation that's spending right now and be relevant to the generations that are upcoming? We get that. There has never been this kind of wealth. And candidly, if I'm in your shoes, how do you take all that 401k money coming out, I want the experience, and you give them something they can't get anywhere else? How do they get to golf with a pro golfer, even if it's going to cost me $5,000? How do I get to have an experience that nobody else does? What does that experience look like in your environment? In Vegas, it was very simple. It's me letting you go meet Gaga, behind stage when she's about to perform. That's what we do for the big bettors that come in. We don't call them whales. They're literally called VIP play. But that's what they get, experiences that nobody else can get. What are we doing that in your space? Because the money's there and people will spend for something that's exclusive. But you've got to make it exclusive. When I was at MGM, we owned Shadow Creek. So many of you might know Shadow Creek and that golf course. It was famous for turning away Bill Clinton because he could not golf there. Because there's one absolute rule: you stay at an MGM resort or you can't golf at Shadow Creek, period. Doesn't matter if you're president of the United States. If you are not staying at an MGM resort, you don't get to play. The reason for that? It's exclusive. But exclusive means exclusive. There are no exceptions. There is no bending of the rule. So anyone playing Shadow Creek knows it's special. And they know that they've done the right things and they paid $1,000 to be there. So that is all kind of tying into this type of experience. And if you look at the wealth distribution, it's different than it was, literally if you dial back 40 years. It's starting to skew older. We've never seen this in any society. And the interesting part, here's where the millennials have succeeded. They are the first generation in history to, at the same age, only be earning 50% of their parents' wealth. Only 50%. And this doesn't mean they're lazy. This doesn't mean they're not working. You know what this is? It's a gig economy. This was a generation that thought they could work part-time and still be paid for it. And that is what is not happening across the board. And I know I'm generalizing, but the data is telling you at least half this generation is in that camp. I have 3 millennials, by the way, and I can talk to this firsthand. I love that my youngest daughter says, I love Airbnb. And I said, I never hear you complain when I'm paying for the 4 seasons, ever. But she tells me the Airbnb experience is really great when she's out on her own. But when I'm in a luxury experience, not quite the same thing. And I used to joke, I do understand it. A decade ago, the millennials were traveling with their parents. But you fast forward a decade, they're in their 30s, they have their own families. My kids used to travel with me. They don't today, nor are they invited. We just go. That's the differential. True story. My daughter calls me. I'm in Miami. I answer the phone, and she's like, where are you? I go, I'm in Miami. She goes, I didn't know you were in Miami. I go, I didn't know I had to tell you. What do you need? I answered the phone. But she was offended that I'm in Miami without her. That was the first wake-up call for her to say, you're no longer traveling with us. You have your family, you have your life, and we have ours. It doesn't mean we don't do family trips from time to time, but it's not every trip. That's the differential. 10 years ago, they were traveling with us when it was all said and done. And this, I love this quote from Harvard Business Review, is simply, the challenge today for all leaders is, how do you perform at the same time transform? That's a challenge for everybody. And that's what I mean. I don't say ignore the younger generations, but quit giving them so much attention when they don't have the money. Especially if you're selling a high-ticket item, really put the effort and the money into the people that have the money, because they're the ones that are going to be spending with you when it's all said and done. Food and beverage, this is kind of the bane of our existence right now. We all know it's expensive, but I wanted to show you that it's not slowing down. The U.S. drought right now has given us the lowest harvest we've seen in Oklahoma and Kansas of wheat since 1957. Why does that matter? Because we feed a lot of animals wheat. So that makes it very expensive. And what you'll see right now, it's the drought conditions that are really driving this. And this is telling us that it's going to get worse because 50% of the country is in an extreme drought condition, and most of it is where we grow a lot of grain and a lot of wheat. The other piece of it, you can see future prices are already starting to reflect it. Soybean oil, corn, oats, soft red wheat, things you don't think about. When corn gets more expensive, so does your bourbon. And if you're running an operation, that matters. You know, I spent my first 9 years in food and beverage. Margins matter, and I always have to tell people, everybody wants the biggest discount where I make the smallest amount of money. That's the challenge, and it's getting harder and harder because of this. And what we're not paying attention, if you did not see the news on Monday, when Russia did not renew their agreement on their wheat production as far as getting it out of Ukraine, it's already expecting to increase by 40% wheat and grain across the world. Because if you don't understand what's happening, they're not going to let the Ukrainians ship the wheat out of their ports. They provide almost 60% of the wheat to the world. That's a challenge if that's going to be the case. So that's where Ukraine becomes a little bit of an issue. This is something I would think about in your golf facilities. Wall Street Journal had a great article last week, but it's talking about literally food tourism travel. So if people are coming to the golf course, what else are you doing from a culinary perspective to really capture them? What have you done to lock in a celebrity chef, even if they're local? Local is in, by the way. You don't need Bobby Flay. You need somebody local that is really talented, really special, and is known in that locale, because they'll all go home and talk about them. How do you work a partnership or agreement, whether they work at your facility or not? To bring them in for a certain night, to do something around a culinary experience. Culinary is where it's at. I always say chefs are the rock stars of our generations today. You know, that's why the Food Channel, you got the Food Channel and the cooking shows, all of them are continuing because it is what people are looking to experience. Things to keep on the radar. This is great for you guys, and this was from Statista and Chartar. You could see it is an uptick in midweek golf, which is great for us. You're seeing the same thing we're seeing in hotels. It's a major uptick on the midweek side of it. It's where we need the demand. The one thing that I'm very optimistic about and to keep on the radar is we haven't seen any budge right now, and the reason we're not slowing down enough is the unemployment rate is not moved. You know, with all those layoffs we read about in Silicon Valley, we went from 3.4% to 3.6%. I mean, it's not moving because we have more jobs than we do people. And if this doesn't slow down, the reason I think this is important, if people have jobs, they're going to keep spending. The one correlation we've had with every recession is high unemployment. So that's why I don't see recession coming. There is no unemployment. Even if things are getting more expensive, everybody has jobs, and that means everybody has money. And I've already told you that we have savings already in the banks. The other thing is, from the airline standpoint, here's good news. The airfare has now stabilized. We're no longer increasing. That doesn't mean we have dramatic decreases. It just means the increases have stopped. We've started to slow this down just a bit. So that's going to be good news for us across the board. I know that's a lot of information. I could go a lot deeper, but hopefully that's helpful for you. And as Karin said, we're here to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
That was awesome. Do you guys have any questions?
It's a cushy chair.
Drum roll.
Wow.
Where are you from, Karin? I'm from Denver. Yeah, thanks for asking. Live outside a little valley called Ken Carroll. If anybody wants to come visit, you're welcome to. Michael, where are you from?
So
We're just going to have our own
I
conversation.
know,
There
yeah.
we go.
Let's talk about what kind of wine
I've
do
got
you
a
like?
question in the left corner there.
What do you guys specifically do when you see a market to baby boomers?
Well, from our perspective on the luxury side, our hotels have been really just looking at boomers across the board. And it's not the AARP that we're talking about. What we are talking about is looking, and candidly, they're looking at people that are part of associations and or golf clubs because that seems to be an audience that, okay, I'm in retirement, I have more time, whatever that retirement looks like. Nobody retires today. But we are really focused on where do they gather and where are they meeting so that we can get to them in the right audiences. That's what our hotels have been doing, but more than anything, the hotels are focused on experiences that we know that audience will love. And that's the differential. You know, it's like we're not talking about bungee jumping. We're talking about culinary experiences that they want to really do something quite special. That is the shift for us, because at one time it was all about activity. But I will stress with you, activity is where it's at too, because we were locked away for 2 years in a lot of cases, and that's what we talk about. People that travel, they want to be active. And when they're not on the golf course, what else are you doing? And if you don't have a pickleball facility, you're missing the opportunity. It is the fastest growing sport out there. And people want to be active. And why do we love pickleball? Because it's tennis without running. But seriously, that applies to an older generation all day long because it's ping pong, but I have to move a little bit more, and it's not quite tennis because I don't have to run from side to side.
So my largest hotel and resort client is Margaritaville Hotels and Resorts. And as you've probably watched the Margaritaville brand come along in its time, it's now introduced Latitudes retirement communities, which what we found with the boomers and what we're marketing to those that want to join a lifestyle residential community is that they want to return to their roots to be with people who are like them. Right, so we're seeing some segmentation among the boomer audience, right, as a whole, to find people where they can be entertained, where they can have activities. We sponsor the National Pickleball Championship as a brand for Margaritaville, and it's because that people want to be with like-minded individuals, right? I still love the idea of escapism, fun, chill, finding a place to be, and you're seeing this bifurcation, thank you, of the boomer audience where people are saying, I want to live in a retirement community of folks that are from the Midwest that think like me, dress like me, enjoy activities like I do. And so we've really stepped into that idea of personalization that Christina presented this morning, and the fact that personalization is necessary for any of the audiences we reach out to, including the boomers, because without it, you may find that you're promoting the idea of having grandchildren to one boomer, and the idea that in reality, some boomers still have children who are school age, right, and under 10 years old at home. So there is no one size fits all for that audience in particular, and they can become quite fickle if they think that boomer means old, right? And so while I'm encouraging you to use imagery of folks that are over 50, over 65 years old in your marketing and advertising efforts, please don't take that to mean that it needs to show what you think 65 looks like or 55 looks like. It needs to be really what your audience is, right? So
It's an active 60. Yeah,
Exactly.
Without
Exactly.
a doubt. So, yeah.
So that was a huge takeaway for me on your slide. Just as insider access for a second, and I know David has a question after that. PJ Magazine, which some of you may or may not receive in your doorstep or to your house, we did a study on it 7 years ago, and 2% of the imagery was female. 2%, right? And those 2% were in clothes for a company that was selling clothes. There was absolutely zero golf imagery in the magazine whatsoever. And so your point resonates so clearly, because now we try to hit, and the PJ Magazine's not owned by PJ of America, but through them and through the PJ Magazine efforts, it's now far greater. I don't know whether it's close to half now. And now you're seeing half imagery of women who work in the industry as well, which is really incredible. But in the beginning, to your point, it was like what they thought women should look like in golf. And so I think it's really easy to fall into that, whether you're female or male, where you're doing this non-biased, you're doing this judgment, which I just think we have to be really cautious on what we're showing and what we're marketing and think it through from a holistic perspective with a lot of people looking at the image before you put it out, so that you get that right. So I love that, so thank you for that.
I have that.
And yes, but I still pay for my children to travel with me, so this was a great takeaway. I'm no longer doing that. I'm gonna say, I went to this conference, you're out. Okay, David.
So as it relates to corporate events and generating leads for this growth in corporate events that you talked about, are you seeing anything unique from a marketing perspective to access this growth of that event business?
Now, the largest corporate event, I'll break it into a couple of buckets, but the largest corporate events, they're traditionally going to have an intermediary working with them of one type or another. So they're going to have people that are helping plan that, whether it's a third party that does full planning, or it might be a DMC that's local. My biggest thing is you should be all over your DMCs locally to make sure that they understand what you can do for them and what you can do for their clients. The hard part is, I can assure you, most of that is the last thought. As they start getting through the process, because it is about rates, dates, and space first. And then once we lock that down, they are so busy right now, clients, they're catching up just like we are. And we forget that it's on both sides. You know, they went from 0 to 60 overnight. They haven't brought back their team, so they're trying to catch up. The one thing I would look at is locally. They're always going to work with your DMOs, and they're going to work with your DMCs to trust what should I be looking at, what are my best opportunities, whether it's golf, whether it's culinary experiences or other travel experiences.
Are you seeing large events, small events, you know, in between? Is there a disparity in terms of which segments are growing faster?
Yeah, well, growing's the hard part. We're seeing growth as compared to where we were during the pandemic. If you're trying to get back to 2019, it's the mid to small that is growing at a much larger pace. As a hotel operator, to me though, it's pure Pareto, because 80% of my revenue comes from 20% of my groups, and they're the monsters. But I have literally 80% of my groups that are producing that other 20%, and they're completely necessary. It's just telling you how big that is. Average size of group right now is about 180 people, somewhere in that ballpark. But if you think about it as a hotel industry, the average hotel size is 270 rooms. So you wouldn't have groups much larger than that. But we do think about the super tankers, and it's one of the reasons we have MGM, because that's 4 million square feet of meeting space, and that's just another beast. But that's where those large tech companies will go meet, either there or at a convention center. So I think that's the sweet spot. You can look at, on average, 150 people in that ballpark. That's really it. And then if you take golf of that, maybe half, somewhere in that ballpark, you would take a look at.
So it'd also be fair to say in 2025 to 2030, Yamaha, who is one of the biggest sponsors of this event, should probably be making a really cool luxury vehicle to drive around your neighborhood at your golf facility, right? That's customized, personalized, and ready to go, right? By 2030. If I'm on Yamaha's team, I'm building that today after this presentation.
With a sustainable fuel. Right.
Of
right.
course.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I should have added that, yes, with a sustainable fuel and a battery, that's awesome. Any other questions for anybody? No, oh, excuse me, yes?
What you said about pickleball, the tennis without playing tennis, without moving. I think part of the reason top golf's so popular is because it's golf without walking. You can't just sit there and do it. Nobody talks about the health benefits of top golf.
Right. And sometimes it's top golf, it's, you know, golf without hitting. So it's drinking.
Yeah, driving range in Applebee's.
I cannot tell you how fast pickleball went, you know, literally overnight, where and the beauty is I have a couple of our resort operators that aren't thinking this quite through. Like, we completely transformed our tennis courts, you know, to pickleball. I go, why didn't you just put extra lights? You don't have to transform it. You can still play tennis on there, but you can put removable lines, which many of our resorts are doing. The Forbes meeting that just took place in Vegas, they actually created pickleball courts on just outside concrete. and ran a tournament during the Forbes Awards program.
Okay.
So it's everywhere, and it is the one question we get is pickleball.
So, a couple of things here. We just heard a lot, really good talk about golf entertainment. I was wondering first question, how you're incorporating that golf entertainment component into luxury destinations. In other words, you're seeing hotels installing simulators, top golf bays, that sort of thing. Other question is, for product producers, one of the tactics they use to stay ahead in terms of their earnings is shrinkflation. Taking a 12-ounce item, turning it into a 10-ounce item, and still raising the price 15%, which helps earnings quite a bit.
Yeah.
So is there a corollary to that in the leisure market, other than, say, an airline shrinking the seat by 15% to get a couple more chairs?
Yeah, it's, if you look at hotels, one of the comments we get from clients all the time is, I'm paying more than I ever have and I'm getting less. And my answer is like, yes. There's no question there, but it's the accuracy of where we're at. In the hotel side of it, daily maid service hasn't fully come back. I think that's going to be segmented. I think luxury, it's an expectation, it'll be there. I think upper upscale will be there. I think everything else, it's going to be very much a variable. And during the pandemic and even in my past life, when we would ask on request about daily turn down service or daily maid service, we had less than 30% take. And yet we have all that extra labor. Housekeeping is one of our largest labor features that we have in a hotel. So some of that is coming back. That's an all-time high rate, but my service profile is different, which does help. But how much of that gets offset that hospitality wages as a whole increased at 15%, while all private industries increased at 5%. So even though I have less labor, I'm paying it more. So it is increasing. And I will go back to the sustainability side. Every time I have a planner that challenges me on daily service, I said, well, I thought you cared about sustainability, because that's a lot of water and energy that we're saving by not washing your sheets every day. And by the way, at home, you don't wash your sheets every day. But in a hotel, it's become the expectation that if you're there for average length of stay is 2.5 nights, do I really need to wash your sheets while you're there for 2.5 nights? Or just make your bed. Those are kind of the questions, but that's some of the flow through we're seeing. And then some of the automation we're seeing, where I think AI is really important, and everyone wants to talk about AI. I think there's a separation that I'm irritated that Microsoft starts with their chat GPT, and all of a sudden it's AI, and we're all freaking out. It's like AI's been around decades, and that's machine learning. And I think the chat GPT you have to separate. It's the difference between blockchain technology and crypto. They're two different things. It runs off the technology, but this is a product. Microsoft ChatGPT is a product that runs on AI. What we're seeing in the hotel business specifically, AI is going to make us more efficient. That is going to help us save some monies. And we should look at anything that is repetitive where AI can help. And I'll give you an example, and this is not AI, this would be robotics. When I was at MGM, if you've ever been on the casino floor, you get served drinks. Complimentary, because we want you drunk as hell as you're betting. So just keep it coming as you're going. But the drinks just keep coming, and they're all well drinks. There's nothing special. You're just going to get your normal, typical drinks. We actually went into something called RoboBar, and RoboBar would be the cocktail server would now come out, and they would literally be punching it in, and a machine would make me a vodka tonic, a vodka soda. It would just be spitting it out. They pick it up at the machine area, and then they go serve it. Why did that matter? Because originally, the bartenders in the middle bars used to have to make those drinks while they're still trying to serve the guest in front of them. So what we found is it didn't save us a lot of labor. It made the servicing so much better, which increased sales. Because the bartender could spend time with people. They could upsell drinks. They could do the things they're supposed to be doing in a bar by getting some automation. And I think the automation is what we all have to figure out. What can we automate in the process, and what does that look like? I'm not one that's afraid of it, and I'm not one that thinks it solves everything. But for anyone to tell me it's going to lose jobs, okay, we have 10 million jobs and not enough people to fill them. We need some of this, because we're not going to, if you look at all population numbers, they're decreasing, not increasing. So we're going to need some AI and some repetitiveness to actually look at that. But we're famous for this in the hotel business. I'm sure it's in the golf course side as well. We think we're so innovative, and I always joke, it took us 40 years to figure out that the bed was an important part of a guest room. We're not that innovative, and that's where we have to start moving faster. And society moves fast enough that if I'm not giving you a better experience than you have at home, I'm disappointing you in the luxury segment. And why does that matter? If I completely renovate a room, but I don't switch out my TV and you have a 4K TV and I have a 3G TV and it doesn't matter, you think the room is crap. Even though I've renovated everything else because your experience at home is better than what I'm selling you at a high price. That's where keeping up is hard. And I think that's a challenge for all of us to understand that. And it's that innovation that moves, how quickly are we moving with it? And candidly, how are we getting ahead of it? How do you do some things that are kind of fun and unique and special, even if it's not going to stick? You know, my wife tells me I'm that guy that buys every technology that comes out because I just want to see what we can do with it. And then I have a drawer full of stuff that I can't do anything with. But I'm playing around with it because some of it does stick. Some of it's like, wow, there's applications here and something we can do. I think we should be doing that every day, you know, at running our businesses to make it special.
All right, let's thank our panelists. That was really great.
Will
Thank
do.
you so much.
Thank you.